Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey, how you doing? So, lots going on right now. Today's episode is another deep dive with myself and Chris Fagan. I didn't want to necessarily record one of these episodes all about the coronavirus. There's plenty of information and resources out there, but I also didn't want to completely ignore it and what it's doing to all of us right now. Now, I've seen a lot of people on Facebook expressing their struggle with not being motivated and not wanting to do things because everything is so uncertain. I think the current challenge for most of us is staying focused, staying upbeat, and actually getting stuff done. Now, I don't want to gloss over the enormity of what's going on right now, but I also can't allow it to distract me, to derail me, to paralyze me. I have to keep moving forward. Look, I'm not judging people who are having a difficult time, but I encourage you to get creative with your time, get creative with your work, focus on your health, and let's get through this without losing our sanity. With that in mind, what I wanted to do with Chris was talk about what's going on now, but also put it into a broader context. Specifically, what do we do when we feel like things are uncertain and we feel powerless or helpless? What kind of decisions can we make when things feel out of control? Now, apparently buying toilet paper is one of those things. But seriously, we need to be mindful about how we're responding to events, the big things and the small things. And that's what Chris and I do here. We take a deep dive into how to avoid feeling paralyzed and derailed by outside circumstances. I will say that Chris and I recorded this a week ago, and things have changed so quickly even since then, and I'm sure they'll be changing rapidly in the days to follow. So please listen to this in the context of it already being a week old. Chris and I are sitting down on occasion for these deep dives. If there's anything that you'd like us to discuss in the future, let me know. All you need to do is send me an email to beth@shesboldpodcast.com. Okay, I'm making this introduction short today because we all have stuff to do, right? We want to be productive. Please enjoy this deep dive conversation and let me know what you think of these. With that, here's Chris Fagan and myself. I thought it might be a good idea I don't want to completely ignore COVID-19, the coronavirus. So I thought it might be good if we talk about that, but in the context of something that's even bigger. And I'll tell you, I read this post on Facebook from a friend of mine, and she said something about, I went out for a run, but my heart wasn't in it. My head wasn't in it. I just couldn't get into it. And I realized it was because I don't know if the events I'm training for are going to be canceled. Mm-hmm. And they're months down the road, mm-hmm. right? And fair point. But what she said was, so I turned around and I just came home because I just wasn't that into it. And I just thought I commented like, you got to keep moving forward. You have to just keep going on about your business because you don't know. And probably more than likely those events will take place. We don't know. We have no idea. But the point is you don't know.
Right.
And I think what's happening is that people are feeling paralyzed. They don't know how to move forward because they don't know what's going to happen in the future. But guess what?
I know, right?
Well, you never know what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
So what do you do? How do you deal with that? And so I think, I think what we can talk about today is like in the scope of what's happening specifically right now in our society and really around the planet. But then also, once we're through this stuff happens all the time to us on a much smaller scale, but there are things that always happen that paralyze us for one reason or another. So I think it would be good to kind of talk about that and discuss how you get through that.
I think that's great.
Is that good?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I'll go back to what I had commented to this gal is like, I just think because you don't know if this 50 miler, this run that you want to do or this other big event that you want to do is going to happen. You just have to act as if. And it's my personal opinion, and I think probably from my own experience, that when you get caught up in that talk, it's because you're spending too much time reading about it and thinking about it. Like, I know for myself. Does that happen to you? Do you get caught up in stuff? And
I don't typically get really caught up in stuff like that.
Okay.
But in this particular instance, I'm just on a fact-finding mission. And so you kind of get caught up in it a little because you're searching for the facts that can help you ground yourself in reality. So I'm looking at it for facts, but to find the facts, you have to be there. You have to be involved in it.
But you can do that with intentionality, though.
Right.
Rather than just open up the news or, on your phone, or open up a newspaper where you have less control about what comes in. You can actually do targeted searches, and then you're looking at specific information that you want. And one thing I will say too, because I want to put this in the show notes. And I'll send this to you if you haven't seen it yet. There's a website that's actually doing a day-by-day tracking of specifically COVID-19 and deaths, recoveries, and cases that have been discovered around the world. And it's pulling all the data from Johns Hopkins, and it's a fantastic resource. I think it's mainly meant for journalists to pull facts, like you said. But it's a really great way just to actually learn the facts and kind of see what's going on. So I'll send that to you, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. Okay, so you're doing the research for it, but I think you have to be intentional about what you're. Well,
and I think one of the inherent issues with this particular virus is that there isn't a lot of data. We have data about what you just described, how it's affecting people, but we don't really have data about how this virus works.
Unlike the flu, where we have years and years of history with
Exactly. And so that's one of the uncertainties that we can dig and dig and dig, and we're never going to find the answer.
Right.
And so I think that's what you're saying is if I am looking for the answer for that, I'm not going to find it, and if that's what's causing any anxiety, we have to let that go, because we're not going to have the answer to that in any short time period here.
Well, that actually brings up a good point, and it reminds me of something that I have caught myself doing every once in a while. If I hear of, just like maybe some big weather event, like a hurricane coming to Florida, and like how much further away can you get from Seattle than Florida, right? So it does not affect me, but I have friends there, so you could justify that I'm concerned for them, which I am. But if there's a big hurricane coming, I will find myself just like looking throughout the day at the latest weather reports and the latest updates to see what happens. And then it turns out, it just misses the coast or something, and it ends up being innocuous. But I realized, I have realized that pulls me away from focusing on what I should be focused on, which on that particular day might be work, or it might be training, or it might be family, But that's kind of the same thing, where it's totally out of our control. And I think it's just being aware of what you're doing.
That example makes me think about human nature is to be drawn to real life drama. And I just think, even all the real life drama TV shows that everybody's hooked on, we just are pulled into real life drama. And if we don't put boundaries around that for ourselves, we can be consumed by it a bit, because it's interesting and it's unfolding in real time, and we then kind of latch ourselves onto the emotions that are happening. But like you said, it's not really impacting our lives. So again, I think it's becoming aware of choosing that time versus getting sucked into that time.
Well, how do you teach a person to do that, to not get sucked into
Well,
it?
I mean, I really think a huge part of that has to do with just your interest in how you want to spend your time. And so if you have a goal or something you're working towards and it's pulling you away from those, that goal, I think then what you're teaching somebody to do is think about how intentionally I want to just spend my time, independent of being pulled away. How do I want to spend my time? Well, maybe I want to have this much time where I want to be able to read more, or this much time to be able to exercise or work towards this, physical goal, or maybe I want to learn to cook, better. So once you put those goals out there, then there's not that much time to be distracted from what is important. If you just kind of reground yourself in what's important to me. Oh, I want to have more family time. Is that contributing to that or not? I think that's really how you learn to value your time as it's not an unlimited resource, right?
So. Yeah, I think therein lies part of the problem, though, too, is that retired people who are part of a more vulnerable population have time.
Yeah, typically, the older population may not have as many variety of
activities
that they're involved with. But
so they have more time to read and to look at the news and to kind of keep up with that. Or even, vulnerable people where it is important for them to have information about it. They're spending a lot of time on that. I think it's hard to refocus.
I would acknowledge that it is hard to refocus if that's your reality, if that's something you're concerned that's going to affect you. At the same time, the people surrounding these people don't have to contribute to that frenzied, chaotic feeling, right? So those of us who maybe don't feel as vulnerable can have more of a calm presence.
Right.
And doesn't mean we can't be proactive in making sure that we do our part as far as, if we're sick, to not go out and try to stay home and not spread our own personal germs and those sorts of things. So, I think that we can all kind of do our part in that way.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the kind of the very focused micro thing that we're concerned about right now. But this kind of thing happens in our lives, maybe not to everybody at the same time, which is going on right now. Maybe that's part of the problem, is that everybody's involved in it, right?
Right.
But we all have things that derail us one way or another when we're not expecting it.
Right.
Right. So either an illness that we have or that someone else has, and then it prevents us from having the goal or going on a trip or doing something that we had wanted to do. Plane flights, get canceled or they're delayed. How do we deal with that kind of thing when things go sideways and they get derailed?
Yeah, what have you observed about that?
Oh, what have I observed? Well, I have, thanks for flipping that back on me.
You're the travel guru.
Yeah, you know what? When it comes to travel, I have to admit that I can be a little impatient. And I'll fully admit that I have to really kind of check myself with these kinds of things. I definitely am getting better about it. And one of the things that I do is that I make sure that when I go to the airport that I leave myself plenty of time. It stresses me out so much to think that I might only have maybe an hour before my flight. I will not arrive at the airport with less than an hour. It's usually about 2 hours.
These days, you do not know what's going to happen at the airport.
No, you don't.
You just don't.
No, I arrived an hour, and I have Delta status, and I get through the premium lane normally. And one time I had to fly Alaska to get to a trade show or a meeting in Dallas. And I arrived an hour and 45 minutes in advance. And did I tell you this story?
No, but I'm relating because the ones like the airline you have status on is the one you don't.
Right. So I arrived an hour and 45 minutes in advance, and I was stuck in the TSA line the entire time. The line was so long. I missed my flight. So did 50 other people. We were all at the customer service counter.
So the TSA line even is is becoming not the fast lane.
Right. No, it was the TSA, just the regular, line. And I missed my flight on that. So that was a bummer. And I thought, okay, well, this is what most people have to deal with. I am fortunate that I've got this status,
that's right,
the premium status that I can normally go through. I think I was pretty calm in that particular instance, but I do know I have matured, and there have been times when I have just been upset, with the person at the counter, and it's not their fault. And sometimes I'll even say that, look, I know I'm not trying to take this out on you, but don't you know who I am?
Right. I mean, so how can we apply what you're describing to just the general topic that we're talking about? So, I mean, in that case, in travel, has it changed the way that you go about showing up at the airport?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. I do make sure that if I don't have a premium status, that I'm always there well in advance. I think it's probably one of the things that encouraged me to get an American Express Platinum card. Because I have lounge privileges.
Right. I have the same thing.
Yeah, there's probably every airport that I go to. I think, maybe one or two really rinky-dink, airports I can't get into, but It's given me the ability to get into a lounge, so I can arrive early and then I can go have breakfast or
sort of have a plan.
lunch.
Like,
Yep. So I can be nice and relaxed, and that's a big deal. And really, like it is. Probably a lot of listeners will say, "Well, gosh, that's really expensive." It is. It's an expense, the fee to have that card, but it literally makes up for itself in all the benefits.
It does if you travel a lot.
Yeah,
and
it does.
The free meals and beverages and peace of mind.
Credits, free Wi-Fi and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about is we recently started using Clear. I don't know if you use that.
I don't.
But
no.
it's actually fairly reasonably priced as far as if you are a frequent traveler and it is not overrun yet.
So Clear and like pre-check. That gets you pre-checked.
Yeah, exactly. So you definitely get through the lines quicker.
So yeah, I do focus, to get back to your question, I do think about these things in advance so that I can be a more relaxed person and that I'm not taking it out on the wrong people. The other thing that I do too is that I realize, I think that with some exceptions, like Hawaii, where everybody is super nice, the TSA folks aren't always super pleasant. Like, they have a hard job. I get that. And they are dealing with a lot of humanity. I feel sorry for them. They're not at a job to be Mr. and Miss Happy.
Customer service is our number one thing.
No, they don't say that, do they?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. So I remember that, and I get the pat downs. I don't go through the machines. So I get the pat down every time. And I try to be lighthearted about it. How are you today? Oh, I'm getting my free massage. This is great. And I try to just bring them down and kind of relax them. So it's not an awkward, because they don't want to do a pat down.
Right.
Like, my gosh.
Right. Make it more human. I mean, it's just like this.
Exactly.
Here we are.
Right.
This is the situation.
Right. Yeah. I have a friend, Harriet Baskus, who has a website called Stuck at the Airport, and she loves airports. Like, they fly her to airports so that she can just walk around and write about different things.
What's in the airport?
Yeah, what's in the airport?
What can
and
you
what
see
souvenirs
here?
can you get? And what's under $10? And I love that attitude of, let me just look at this with a mind of curiosity.
Right.
And if my plane is delayed or it's canceled and I have to deal with this, then how can I best deal with it being stuck here and at least enjoy the process rather than being ticked off about it?
People watching is great at airports.
Yeah, it sure is.
Some good food at some airports.
Yeah. SeaTac is getting better all the time.
Right.
Lots of options there. So yeah, that's what I do. I just kind of prepare myself as best I can, kind of mentally, to get beyond that.
So what about like when something throws you off your game in other ways? So that was an example of a flight being canceled. But what if something else happens that really just changes the whole plan? I was on this plan and I'm training to go to this event. Earlier we were talking about event, but let's just say it's not even going to be canceled, but something happens. I get the flu and I can't train like I wanted, or, my dad gets ill. I need to go visit him.
Yeah. What's interesting is that the bigger it is for me, the better I handle it. That might sound really weird, but it's almost like I go into like an emergency mode. Like, okay, stay calm. How are you going to handle this? Lost my passport. I don't know. That's like the most severe thing that I can think of.
Right.
Or my flight.
I'm international. I lost my passport.
Yes. Or my flight gets canceled and, I have to get somewhere to get either home or to meet my group, meet a tour group. Like, how am I going to handle that? That almost calms me down, just forces me to calm down and really be in like an emergency mode. It's little things that I think bother me more, that maybe those things come up really quickly for me and I react more quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the difference with it. But yeah, I can handle bigger things, like bigger emergencies, because I can just see like, okay, big picture. This isn't in the scheme of the world. This has happened to other people before. How can I deal with this in the best possible way? And what are all the options?
Yeah, I feel like what you're saying is it's like if you can really put whatever that incident is in perspective, and you were just describing bigger things can really bring you into focus. And I think then even though, I very much relate to how you described that, because I can think of a number of examples where big things happened and it's just like, total calm and peace comes over the body, and you're like, this is something I need my laser focus. Whereas those irritating things that happened, that come up, I think just throw us off because we were sort of charging down the road and we wanted to not have a detour, and now there's a detour, and why is a detour here? And, realizing, I don't know how you get rid of that.
The little irritants
To not irritate you.
Yeah.
But I think it's just that awareness of like, oh, okay, that's irritating me, and it really shouldn't, traffic or whatever. But yeah.
Isn't there a book, Don't Let the Small Stuff Get You Down, or
something like that?
Yeah, and it's and it's all small stuff. And that's kind of,
and I think we can all almost relate to it. Right.
Yeah, that is the key to life, I think, is not letting the small stuff derail us. But that, to me, like I said, that is the stuff that derails us. Like, I can see a car accident, and I'm not trained medically in any way, but I kind of know, call 911, stop the car, pull over in a safe place, get out and help this person. Like that stuff is all, it's like time slows down for me, and I can deal with that kind of thing. But these responses, like the automatic responses, that's where I have the most difficulty. Kind of even a bigger picture, or maybe something that's even more important when we're talking about this and kind of our own actions and responses to things, is how our actions affect other people. And here's a good example, I think, where I really have to keep myself in check even more so, is if I'm frustrated with my laptop or my phone or my cell service, and I have to get on the phone with customer service, and those poor 19-year-old a lot of times, like 19-year-old kids, I can take it out on them. And I try to use the caveat, like, I know this isn't your fault. I'm not trying to take it out on you, but I'm really pissed. And that doesn't make their day. That doesn't make them any happier. And you know what? It's not going to get the answer that I need or I want to. And so, sometimes I just have to take a breath and think, okay, don't go down that path in this particular circumstance.
Right. And sometimes I find that can be as I'm irritated at myself for not doing something that's put me in a predicament. In an example, just last night, this is just affecting people around you. I was going to make this meal. So I was putting the brown rice in the cooker, and then I didn't turn it on. And then I went upstairs and I did a bunch of stuff.
An hour and a half later.
And I know it takes an hour and a half. And so I came down, I'm like, and that was sort of the centerpiece of what I was trying to put together. And then my husband walks in and said, "Oh, it didn't get turned on. I walked by it and I thought it was on." And then I get mad, and I start getting mad at him for saying that to me, which is ridiculous because I forgot to turn it on, right? So
why didn't you look closer?
Right. And then I start feeling judged, and I'm thinking, okay, that's just my own mindset. I need to let go of that. He's not criticizing me. He just, I could have helped you, but I heard it as like criticizing, right? That's different than your example, but I think it's a good example of, things happen, and it's how we decide to react. There's so much happening around us that is out of our control. This coronavirus is out of our control. Anything in our environment is really out of our control. But what's in our control is our inner environment. And, choosing to have that reaction I wasn't being really my best self. But it was very much a reaction.
Yeah.
Versus like
being
pause, and then realize.
It's really difficult to train yourself to
It really is.
do that, though.
It is. But I think the first step is just being aware, acknowledging it. Like if I just can say, yeah, that's on me, that was me, then the next time I can try to see, is that me again? What is this pattern? But really, there was something that happened right before that. And I had read something in my email that was, that I won't get into, but it was a negative, and it was making me feel negative. And so then I transferred that negative feeling to this situation, a minute later.
Okay, yeah. So it wasn't a minute before you were supposed to plug it in or turn it on.
No, there was something in my email that was information that was a negative, and I was still internalizing and reacting to that information. And then when I went to do this and realized it was not turned on, it just amplified that into something that it did.
You were having a conversation with somebody who wasn't there, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
My mom used to say, she's gone now, but she would say, I wake up at 4:00 in the morning and I think about the cat litter. Did I change the kitty litter? And that would keep her awake, until she got it figured out. And it's kind of like, I always laugh to myself about that, about how such a minor thing can weigh on someone, a retired person,
Well, it just starts spinning in your mind like a little gerbil. Did that happen? Did that happen? Did that happen? And
yeah. And then, bigger issues, we do that all the time. We have conversations about things all the time.
We do.
And it is really catching. I think maybe we should just all be in therapy,
Well,
maybe those Hollywood stars are onto something.
Well, interestingly, my husband then came back later and was like, I think that might have had to do something with that, other thing. And I'm like, yes, I've already, kind of come to that realization. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, our actions impact others. Our actions impact not just one-on-one, but people in communities around us.
And the environment.
Too. Right?
Yeah.
Our actions impact the environment.
Right. And how do we make choices that are healthier? I don't want to say good or bad, but I want to just say healthier, for ourselves and for everybody else. And that goes back to, I see a lot of stores closing right now in the Seattle area. A lot of stores are closing. A lot of restaurants are closing, and they're just not getting business, right? So that's one.
So they're closing temporarily.
They're closing temporarily. I think that remains to be seen in some cases,
right?
But they are closing because they're not getting business, and it's because people aren't going out because even if they feel healthy, they don't want to be a carrier. Right. And they're concerned about who they may infect, and they don't want to be around anybody who's in that same situation. So, that's an example of how our actions might affect other people. And so you've got the good and the bad of that.
And, it's like, totally. Do you go or don't you go?
Right. So you're kind of sequestered, right, for the health of people, but then businesses are failing as a result of that. So.
Right. So there's that. There's the example I think one of your listeners gave regarding, we choose to go on an airplane to go somewhere really interesting.
Right, yeah.
Independent of the coronavirus.
Nicole had sent in a question, just some travel, wanted us to touch upon some travel things. And then there's
So now we're using fuel and impacting the environment. And how do we reconcile that?
Right. I don't quite know the answer to that, but I will say this. There was an article in Outside Magazine. It was back in January, and the author is Cassidy Randall, and it's January 11th of this year, 2020. And the title of it is Travel is Worth the Carbon Footprint. And she kind of goes into this whole thing about how it's really important to continue to travel. Because what we're seeing, like she traveled to a remote place and then she's able to write about it and kind of understand it. And it shouldn't be something that is just left for like the elite, for travel writers or for specific people. And I've always thought that too, is that, yes, I understand the impact of my travel and the carbon footprint of taking a flight. But I also go to places that I'm able to bring back to other people and educate them about it and get them to go there too. Because I think we may be going a little off topic here, but I do think travel is really important because you're helping other cultures survive basically through your travel. And really, like, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a collapse now because people aren't able to travel.
Right.
And there's going to be this trickle down effect that's going to be horrendous, in terms of a recession or a depression or, call
For
it
sure.
whatever.
Many economies, that's what their economy is based on completely.
Yeah.
So they're vulnerable in that regard. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the other part of that travel equation is not only what you were describing, but, we bring global understanding and spreading global understanding. And I think that's what we need in this event that's happening right now with the coronavirus, as well as anything that's going to come up in the future, is that, this just demonstrates how much we are all interconnected.
Yes, we are.
And as much as you want to try to make us not interconnected, some people in the world. It's just, it's one world, right? So I don't know if that addresses that question, but I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just something you have to personally grapple with when you're making choices about coming back to the environment.
Well, that's true, right. And I think it's on us as individuals to encourage our government, at a federal level and even a state level or a city level to make the bigger changes, because there are bigger things that can be done that offset those, the carbon footprint. And it's not just to say, well, Beth, that's easy because you're in the travel industry, so of course you want to just keep traveling and leave it to somebody else. But it's not just about that. Big decisions need to be made by big companies and by big governments in order for change to really take effect.
Yeah, for sure. And those of you in the Seattle area, today is a big day. We're voting on our primary, so hopefully you've all gotten out there and voted. Because, whatever you're voting for, again, it's your actions affect others. And so if you leave it to others to do the small or heavy lifting and you're a bystander, then you're not having a say in, what you want, your world, however small or big, how that looks.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is this whole thing with the carbon footprint. I think people are being shamed into whatever it is that they're doing, and it doesn't matter if you're a meat eater, or you wear leather, or you're on a plane, or you drive a gas-powered vehicle. We all share in it. We are all making decisions.
Right.
And I think the key is just not to be shaming other people in whatever decision that they want to make, whether it's canceling a dinner party because you're concerned about having people at your house, or to go to a store or not to go to a store. Right. It's just we're all doing the best we can.
Right. And they're both valid decisions. And I agree wholeheartedly about that shaming idea that, it's so easy to point the finger at somebody else's behavior and say, you're not perfect. Well, who is? Mm-hmm. And we live in an imperfect society. And there's just no way for all of us to do the right thing, in quotes, every second of every day, because we live in a modern society.
We all have phones, and we
live in a modern society. So
we're using electricity and we're using gas.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what sometimes gets a little amplified too, where people pile on to one thing. You shouldn't eat meat. And then all of a sudden that's horrible.
Right.
Whereas,
or almonds.
Oh my gosh. What is the thing of the day that we should be focused on?
Yeah.
It's always something.
Yeah.
And we have to just, I think that's the same way I think about diet. I don't go on a certain diet necessarily. It's just like being smart and taking in what is important for my body and not being worried about every little thing so much, because that can cause anxiety right there. Right. And I think what we're talking about is trying to let go of anxiety related to things that we want to be intentional, but we can't be perfect in the way that we approach. And there's no right answer to the way that we approach all of these things.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about just the anxiety level, and to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, mm-hmm. that we're being anxious and stressed over things that we do not have control over, that we're just making things up because we don't have all the information, and the information isn't there because the future is unknown.
And it always will be.
And it always will be. Right. I think it's just being aware, taking a pause, and training ourselves, which is, it is really difficult to do. I know from my own experience, just taking a pause and asking ourselves where the conversation is coming from, that we're making up in our head.
Right.
Who's really having that conversation, and kind of stopping it before it gets out of control and it wakes us up at 4:00 in the morning and we're wondering about the kitty litter.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I like Brené Brown, and she says something that you just made me think about. She says, the story that I'm telling myself is ... And I think that if you can say that, and then you go, well, what story am I telling myself? And then you can almost snap yourself out of the bubble like, oh, there is no factual basis for that story I'm telling myself. Or, oh, there totally is. Because when I start doing that with my son, the story I'm telling myself is, I'm worried you're not going to do well in this class. It's all me. It's a worry. And I want the best for him, and I twist it into wanting the best for him, but really it's coming across as worry. Mm-hmm. Right?
You know what's really interesting is that I talk to a lot of women for the podcast, and one of the things that comes up often, and part of it is probably me driving it, but I also hear it just comes out naturally from a number of these women who are doing really cool things. They say, I realized that I was telling myself a story that just wasn't true. That, like in the most recent episode, this gal started her own company, and she's got this thing called a Kula cloth, and listeners will have heard about it by now. So she started her own company, but she had told herself all the reasons why she couldn't be an entrepreneur and couldn't do all these things. So this was her story. I've always thought of it in that bigger context of, I'm not a runner, I'm not an athlete, I'm not an entrepreneur, you can't make money and travel. Those are my own personal stories, right? But, the way you just framed it was, we're telling these stories constantly. Yeah, we're always having that conversation, whether it's, Marty, why didn't you turn on the brown rice? Like, what story is that?
Oh, that's me, projecting my I forgot to do it onto him. Right.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's almost easier to realize the big stories that we tell ourselves than it is these things that happen 500 times a day. That's really hard to stop. That's going to be my new goal.
Yeah.
I'm going to start doing that. And you know what's really great? I journal a lot. And I think of it in terms of like a Harry Potter pensive. I don't know if I'm saying that word right, but he's got this thing where he writes things down and he puts it in this like big pot. I don't even remember the context of it at this point, but it's like if he puts it there and then it's behind him. So I think of my journals as that kind of thing, is that if I can do like a little brain dump, then that stuff is behind me. I even do it with my task lists. I'll just sit down, and if I can write down, I'm going to write down 100 things that I have to do, and that's ridiculous. And so when I write them all down, then they're out of me and they're not worrying me because they're all just there on paper.
They're not spinning like the gerbil in your brain.
Yes, exactly. But if I can do this same thing about how ridiculous it is about the stories that I'm telling myself, like whose fault was it that I didn't turn the brown rice on, or I dumped the coffee container all over the floor, like what kind of story is behind that?
Right, especially when there's an emotion of anxiety connected to it or some negative emotion, right? What story am I telling myself? I suppose it would be positive to have the positive sides too, because then you have that positive reinforcement. I just think it's interesting. I was. This is a little segue, but it reinforces this idea. In my life, I also run these brainstorm meetings and consulting gigs for companies. So I was working with a smaller company of 6 people with one, the president, who I've known for over 20 years, and watched this. She's done a great job in successful business. And so part of it was figuring out strengths of the team and individual strengths. And there's this whole philosophy out there of, instead of figuring out our weakness and working on it, it's figure out your strengths and amplify those, right? But anyway, we uncovered that a variety of people that were working for her had this mindset of, I don't deserve to celebrate my individual successes. And, kind of stemmed from their belief in team. So we should celebrate team. But the story they were telling themselves is, I don't deserve. And so it was sort of this aha moment. So it's always been there, and there was sort of this, oh, that's why you feel anxiety when we want to focus on you. And even your positives, not negatives.
Interesting.
Right? It was an uncomfortable situation for their own personal reasons, right? So anyway, that just amplifies like, oh, you could look at anything. And when you are wondering, why am I acting this way?
It would also be interesting to do, like you said, to not only the negative, but the positive, but also understand, is that coming from anger or stress or anxiety or lack of time? Or,
yes, linking it back to something would be really interesting.
Yeah. Or the email that I read that just set me off, and it really has nothing to do with this
And
at
I
all.
have to go back there. You sort of ladder it back to, the core starting point.
I've got a fun little project ahead of me.
I think that's an ongoing project, right?
I know. I have to buy a new notebook for that. It'll be a fun one.
Awesome.
I think that's a really good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I think that probably leaves listeners with some ideas about how to approach things in the future without making them up in their head before,
Got plenty of things to do
Yeah.
that we don't have to make up more things.
Yeah. And I think the real key is that not to let things derail us or paralyze us. I love that word paralyze because I have felt it myself and I know what it's like, that sometimes I may find myself just looking out my window thinking like, I don't know where to start, because what if that big storm comes and I lose power and then I won't be able to get on my laptop? What am I going to do? I make up the story and then the storm never comes and I don't lose the power. And
totally.
It's just
I think we're all really good storytellers and we don't realize it. We have a whole plot and characters happening that never happened.
We should be writing this down, right? New books. Chris, thanks again for sitting down. This is so fun doing these deep dives.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that not only did it help take your mind off of what's going on right now, but that it gave you some ideas for how to just stay more focused, more present, and ultimately more productive going forward. Chris and I did our first deep dive on episode number 115. If you haven't heard that, you might like to go back and have a listen. You can find that and all of my other episodes at shesboldpodcast.com/episodes or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. If you'd like to support the show and let me know how much you are inspired by these conversations and how much you look forward to hearing the uplifting stories from my guests, go to patreon.com/bebold. Patreon supporters get to submit questions for me to ask guests and become part of our private Facebook group, and that is ladies only. They also get access to bonus content, including questions I ask of the guest. To keep up with me and all of my travels and my running, yes, I'm still running through all of this, you can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram at both Beth Whitwa, BETHWHITWA, and Wandergal. Feel free to leave a message or question at 877-280-5170. Ladies, gentlemen, I love feedback. Please bring it on. Give me some feedback. You can also email me at beth@shesboldpodcast.com. And I should mention that I'm starting to get some ideas from listeners for future deep dive episodes with Chris Fagan. So if you have suggestions for topics, do let me know. Next week, my conversation is with Laureen Nussbaum. Laureen is a Holocaust survivor and was a friend of Anne Frank's. She's written a new book about a man who helped save her family as well as countless others during the Nazi invasion of Amsterdam. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. And until next time, be bold.